Are you thinking of selling a house? Are you thinking of selling a house without a realtor? We are contending with a lot of different trends in the housing market right now. For instance, interest rates are up. Homeowners insurance is up in the state of Florida, I think across the country at this point. This is making it a little difficult for buyers to get into certain price points, and they're kind of having to drop down a price point or two in order to accommodate those higher monthly loan payments. And they're doing this to keep that loan payment down. So in other words, maybe they originally could focus on $400,000 for a home to purchase, like $400,000 to $350,000, and now they're looking from $350,000 to $300,000 in order to keep that loan payment where it needs to be because of the higher interest rate, which adds to the payment, the monthly payment, and the higher homeowners insurance, which adds to the monthly payment. Even though sellers are not necessarily listing their homes at lower price points yet, they are not pushing the market as strongly as they were in the last couple of years. They are negotiating on price these days, and this is in order to accommodate the changing trends in the market. Buyers and sellers have to move with the market. Sellers are also kind of working with buyers in the loan process. They are back to giving buyer credits at closing, which is a little bump of cash for whatever. Borrowers and sellers are actually working on loan buy downs at this point. And this is not only to get buyers into the home, it's also to help them get a little bit more for their money. Buyers and sellers have to buy and sell. Buyers and sellers alike are getting a little creative right now in order to get more for their money or just to get more money. Having said all of this, the last thing that I would do as a seller to get more money is selling a house by owner. And here are my top 5 reasons, even though there are so many more, why you shouldn't. Number 1, in particular order, contingencies. There are so many contingencies that are built into the contract. There are contingencies that override the contract through an addendum. There are contingencies that are created out of thin air because somebody wants that to be part of the contract. If you don't understand contingencies within a contract, number 1 reason you should absolutely be using a realtor to sell your home or buy a home. Just to give you a couple examples of a contingency that you might not be aware of or how to handle it, a very common one is buyer wants to buy a house, they find a house that they like, they can't buy that house without selling their house first. This is a common contingency that buyers try to negotiate, and if you are not an agent, you may not know exactly how to handle that, which is there is a specific addendum that the state of Florida uses to go with that in order to protect the seller. I'm going to tell you right now, our Florida contract is heavily weighted on the buyer side. So when you're selling your home, this is one thing that you need to understand, and you do need to understand all the little things throughout the contract that are going to protect you. A couple other contingencies. One is buyer wants to move in early or seller wants to stay in the home a little bit after it closes. These are contingencies that are negotiated at the beginning of the contract. If you don't know how to handle them, again, you can get yourself stuck in a rut and it can end up being a huge liability for you. Number 2, in particular order, is financing. First and foremost, financing is the number 1 contingency built into the contract. It is throughout the contract, and there are several addendum that are written to create extra contingencies for a loan, and it is all to protect the buyer. So again, financing is number 2. When you are selling your home and someone makes an offer, you should not accept an offer on price alone. And the reason that I say that is there are so many different types of financing out there that could cause extra headache. Even though you're getting that just a little bit extra money, it might not be worth the liability or the headache. Obviously, cash is king. Everybody wants to get a cash buyer for their house. It just doesn't happen. Most buyers are gonna have to have a loan attached to that, and you as a seller have to determine what types of financing you're willing to take. Or is your home in an area or specific area on a map that can take every type of financing, or maybe there's limited financing. Rural financing is only offered in rural areas. VA financing is not offered for everything, and if you are willing to take a VA loan, you have to know that the seller is required to pay certain buyer closing costs to get through that loan. So again, another reason to use an agent to sell your home, because they are going to know the ins and outs of lending and hopefully connect you with the smartest lender to get you through that process. Number 3, another very important one, is earnest money down, which we in the world of real estate call EMD. It is a good faith practice from buyer to seller, and the larger that dollar amount is, the more committed everybody is to staying in line with that contract. It's like a dangling carrot over everybody's head, keeping everybody doing what they're supposed to do, specifically the buyers. It is from buyer to seller. Seller, I really want your house. I'm gonna give you this chunk of money as a good faith practice, and if I back out, you could possibly get to keep my $10,000. That is what earnest money down, also EMD. It is very important. I would not go into contract with someone without your earnest money. When a buyer puts up earnest money down going into contract, it is typically held with a title company in a non-interest bearing escrow account. Some real estate agents or brokers will hold escrow, but not many do because of the liability that follows that earnest money down. Liability is key word here. Once that earnest money goes into the escrow account, it's held there until closing, and then that money comes off the top of what the buyer owes at closing. Another important thing to keep in mind is what happens if somebody does back out of the contract? How does somebody get that earnest money down? Does the buyer get it? Does the seller get it? Who was in default? One important thing to know is that a title company is not going to release that earnest money down to either party unless it's all agreed upon in writing. If nobody can agree upon it, then you have to take certain steps. Do you know what steps they are? I do. I'm just saying, it's another excellent reason to use a realtor when you're selling your home. Number 4 is the closing timeline. What I mean when I say this is that there are so many different timelines and deadlines that have to be met throughout the contract in order to keep it valid, or in order to keep that earnest money doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is, like I said earlier, keeping everybody in line with the contract. One of my most important things that I tell buyers and sellers when I'm working with them is that I map out each deadline, each timeline. We have a date on it. We know what's supposed to happen, when it's supposed to happen, and what happens if it doesn't happen. One tricky one, an example that I will give you, is for the title commitment. Not many people know about this, including agents. And if that timeline is not met, a buyer can walk away from the contract and get their earnest money back. Yikes! Just saying, really great reason also to use an agent when you're selling your home or when you're buying a home. Number 5, super important reason to use an agent when you're selling a home, worked into the contract, are repair limits. This gets overlooked all the time. When I'm working with a buyer and we write a contract or an offer on a home, I leave that blank and I let the seller counter that. If it is left blank and nobody tends to it, the seller could possibly be responsible for up to 4% of the contract price. For example, if your house is under contract for $400,000 and nobody does anything about repair limits, that's an additional $16,000 that you're gonna have to give the buyer possibly. You've got your general repair items, your wood destroying organism items, which is also referred to as WDO. It's any sort of wood, anything that can cause wood rot on the house, whether it's a termite or water or whatever. And then you also have your permit limits. So those are your repair limits that you need to tend to, especially when you're a seller. I think one very important thing to remember, whether you are a buyer or a seller, is that everything's negotiable. Yes, there are state contracts that are the standard, but it doesn't mean that it can't be negotiated. And when you go under contract, it doesn't mean that your negotiating is over all of the time, especially once you get through that inspection period and the buyer wants to negotiate repairs. That is a huge renegotiation period in the contract. Again, I cannot stress how important it is to use an agent when you're selling a home or buying a home, but there are so many intricacies throughout the contract that you're just not going to know about unless you're handling that contract day in and day out. Thank you so much for keeping up with our channel. We have so much at Beach Living with Jen and Steph, whether it's about our area, whether it's about real estate. So keep watching the videos. I hope this video was helpful for you. I really do. I really cannot stress enough the importance of using an agent. And yeah, I hope it was helpful, and we will see you next Thursday. Bye.